Welcome back to another month of Maddie's Baking Book Club. This month, it was November. Sorry, I'm posting a little late. The book was Whale. It is a Korean story that was translated into English. And so in the story, it was historical fiction, very, very intense, a lot of things happening, a lot of terrible things happening. And throughout it, we don't hear a lot about food outside of fish and rice and honey. I decided to lean into the idea of rice, so I am making a toasted rice white chocolate ganache that actually turned out so good, and I love this tea. I used a tea that is just like Nurungji, the like burnt crispy rice at the bottom of a pan when you're making rice, and that is turned into sort of a tea form. I've just dumped that in, and because it is just at the end of the day rice, I left it in, though you could strain it out if you want. I just used a white chocolate pastry cream base here for the ganache, so I have cream, sugar, that rice, tea in my saucepan. I tempered that into more cream and some cornstarch, and then everything is going back into my saucepan to thicken up. Once it just barely comes to a boil, I'm going to take it off the heat and pour it over my melted chocolate. Now, this book was chosen by my friend Sarah. I did try to film a book discussion, but I have been running into some technical difficulties. I'm trying to change up my microphone and filming setup, and I am really struggling. So this is just going to be a short little pastry discussion, and I'm not going to go too much into the book right now because of the technical difficulties. So now that you see I have that really thick pastry cream, I'm pouring it over the chocolate, and I'm going to stir it together and set it to the side so it can cool for about 15 to 20 minutes before I emulsify in the butter and let it cool completely. This one I did let it cool a bit too much. It got really thick, which is okay. That happens sometimes even to the best of us. So this ganache got really thick and it was a little bit hard to have a nice pour into my pan, but I'll just set that aside to cool while I work on the shells. I wanted to create an ocean sort of theme, this book called Whale. Although the book did not completely revolve around whales in any sense, it was an important part in the story. When one of our main characters, Kumbok, saw a whale tail, she saw the ocean for the first time, and it was this moment of something huge and grand and impressive, and it was kind of a little glimmer of hope and something impressive and amazing and incredible, surrounded by all of these really dark and tragic things. So I really wanted to keep that in the story. We do see the whale theme carried out later in her life as well. So I wanted to translate this into macarons, so I just had my normal regular French macaron batter here. It is a very dark blue color. I used a sapphire blue here for this. And then I'm just piping regular circle shells. I really debated, should I make whale tail shaped macarons? Should I make wave shaped macarons? But then I decided to add in all the details in royal icing. So I am going to let these rest a little bit, bake them up, and while they are baking and after they have baked and cooled, I'm going to add on some royal icing decoration for the waves, and then a little bit of wafer paper decoration for the whale tail. I really like to use meringue powder when I am making royal icing, especially a really small batch like this. It is really easy to whip up. I think it's a good idea to always stack projects that need royal icing because it is kind of hard. Macarons usually don't use that much royal icing, even if it's a decoration across the whole shell, just because of how small macarons are. Then while that is sitting off to the side, I am going to just really quickly begin my wafer paper decoration. I just have a little strip of wafer paper. I could have used even less than this. And then a little bit of black gel food colorant. I watered down a little bit. And because I didn't want to destroy any of my pastry brushes by brushing this colorant across the wafer paper, I just put on some food safe gloves and I'm smearing that colorant across the wafer paper. Now, because this does absorb a lot of moisture really easily and quickly, and then as it dries, it has a tendency to curl up like any paper would, I'm adding a little bit of parchment paper on the top of that, and then I'll put it under some sheet pans and set it to the side to dry. For the royal icing waves, I just put a really tiny piping tip, like a size 1 or 2, on my piping bag. Then I'm going through and creating some little squiggles. Now, when you are working with royal icing, this is a really time-sensitive ingredient. And so right after I've piped it, or you could probably get away with doing 2 or 3 at a time, then I'm going to go in with a tiny little paintbrush, food safe of course, use only for your baking. Dip it in a little bit of water and then pull at the royal icing to create this sort of wave pattern. Now, between the blue that I used and the waves, and because I don't have any like sand or beach or anything like that, these waves do kind of look like they could be clouds. But that's okay. I had the idea of doing this as a wave. It does make a lot more sense when you have, again, a little edge of beach on your macarons. I've done that before. It is so cute. But I guess if you wanted to turn this idea into a cloud for whatever themed macarons you have, it's pretty versatile method of creating either waves or clouds on your blue shells. This is a really small amount of royal icing. It's a really thin layer, so this is going to dry really quickly. For one of them, because this whale tail was seen so rarely in the story, I really just wanted to have one macaron have this whale tail. So after my wafer paper dried, I just cut out a sort of whale tail shape. So I just kind of went in with that base and then cut 2 kind of fin-like things from the end and called that a day. This story, I'm so happy I got the chance to read it. It is not something I probably would have picked up on my own. It was so intense. A lot of things were a bit hard to read. There are a lot of hard topics. It's not a nice book, but it was very interesting. The way it was written, I actually really enjoyed the narrator, the way that we started and ended in the same place. So we started kind of at the end and then backtracked many years. Learned about a lot of characters, focused mostly on this one character, Kumbok, who saw the whale tail in the ocean for the first time as a young woman. And then the story begins and ends with her daughter. So a very different shift in perspective. And meanwhile, we have this narrator who is mostly like sticks to the story, but sometimes will say like, oh, I'm getting ahead of myself, or you'll hear more about that later, you don't need to hear all of this story. And then often when anything happens, always brings it back to, this is the theory of blah blah blah, XYZ. This is the theory of family, or this is, bringing it back to this idea of like, well, this happened, so kind of there's no hope for anything else to result than the result that happened, and it kind of helps to explain some of these really terrible things that are happening along the story. Once my ganache has fully cooled, I am just going to pipe that into my finished macaron shells. Anytime you're using royal icing on your macarons, make sure to let it completely dry and harden before you fill and refrigerate your macaron shells. Otherwise, you're going to get a really weird result. So as I pipe these, I'll go back to my story because of the technical difficulties, and I didn't film my discussion. So in this story, we have this character, Kumbok, who has so much hardship, but at the same time, she has these few opportunities for some growth and learning and makes some really positive, powerful strides in her life. So we see this duality of life kind of attacking this human and other side characters as well, and then some instances when she really fights back and kind of pushes the limits. So in a kind of bizarre way, the story ended up being a really interesting kind of depiction of life and how things can be horrible, and also there can be these little glimmers of friendship and opportunity and maybe even hope along the way, even as tragedy continues striking. I don't know if I would necessarily recommend this book, certainly not to everyone. There are a lot of hard topics inside of it, but if you want to dip your toes into some Korean literature, it is worth a go. Thank you again to Sarah for choosing this month's Maddie's Baking Book Club book. Sorry again for my technical difficulties. Hopefully by next month I have my camera and microphone situation better in hand and I can have another chat with you all then. Until next time, have a wonderful day. Bye!